Hello and welcome to Tata Literature Live, the Mumbai International Lit Fest, co-sponsored by Tata Steel and Tata Projects and powered by Godrej. This session is sponsored by Godrej. There will be a short Q&A at the end of the session, so please do send in your questions in the comment section of the platform that you are viewing from. Have you ever taken shelter under a banyan tree on a sweltering hot summer's day? Or stopped to smell the night air while walking past a jasmine plant? What would our lives be like without elements that form the very sustenance of our planet? Our panel today weighs in. Environmentalist and best-selling author Jonathan Drori, CBE, has been associated with the Eden Project, WWF, the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew, and the BBC. He brings plant science to life with stories of human history and culture. We have him here today, planting a green thought with his new book, Around the World in 80 Plants, the follow-up to his best-selling Around the World in 80 Trees. Pradip Krishen is a naturalist, environmentalist, and an author. He is well known for his works Trees of Delhi, Jungle Trees of Central India, a field guide for tree spotters, and Abha Mahal Bagh. Mr. Krishen has been instrumental in restoring several degrading landscapes with native vegetation. Chairing the discussion today will be Suprabha Seshan. She is a rainforest conservationist and an environmental educator who has been working at the Gurukul Botanical Sanctuary in Wayanad, Kerala for the past 3 decades. She envisions a green phoenix, a people's movement that rises from the ashes of our modern industrial culture. She lives in a garden that is dedicated to plants of the Western Ghats. And now, Trees Company. Over to our panelists.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Pradip. Hello, John. I'd just like to set this off. I have the sense that your books are really the tips of a vast iceberg, or maybe for our conversation, we can say they're propagules out of a vast forest that you come from. And can we have a sense of this wonderful underground, this world that you have come from, that you have inhabited? You both speak so much about plants. Can you put yourselves as one of the plants in your books and describe yourselves from your culture, your history, your background? Both of you, maybe a few minutes each. And I have a little thing. If any of you goes over time, I'm going to present a nepenthes, a dried nepenthes. If I want either of you to say something a little bit more, I'm going to present a little lotus, dried lotus. Is that all right? I thought we should have some members of the plant world in our conversation.
That's wonderful. Why don't you go first, Jonathan?
Yes, John.
Well,
go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I grew up in southwest London, near the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. And my father, who was a recent immigrant to the United Kingdom from Eastern Europe, his first passion was botany. He had to retrain in engineering because just before the war they didn't need so many botanists. And my mother was really sort of passionate about the sort of beauty of plants, and actually quite knowledgeable as well. When she died, she had in her handbag one of these sort of jewelers' magnifying glasses that she used to look at the tiny structures of plants for their beauty rather than their science. But it was that combination, I think. And actually, there's a picture you could put up, which is JD with Father Q, 1967, which is me with my father. And I remember that day very clearly because that was the day that he told me, first of all, about slavery and the sort of horrors of slavery, and he did that through giving me a piece of a plant which had been used in the southern United States as a sort of punishment plant to enslaved people, and that was his way of broaching the subject. And he also gave me a lick of an opium poppy, the latex from an opium poppy. And I remember it just made my tongue go ever so slightly numb. But the effect it had on my teacher when I told her about it, and they sent a social worker around to check that I was okay, the effect was really startling. And I realized that then that this sort of combination of science, human stories, culture, folklore, with a child's eye at the age of 6 or 7, it was a sort of, I didn't have a very sophisticated view, but as an adult, I look back on that time and I realized that was the moment that I really became interested in not just botany, but how all the subjects fit together.
Great. Pradip, where do your roots go down to?
Well, not very long ago, actually, because in a sense, I got interested in trees because I'd given up making cinema. I wasn't able to make, to go on with making films, and started to make a little home for myself in the jungles of Madhya Pradesh, central India, and happened to live next to a forester who would go on walks with me and my architect friend, and we decided to learn how to spot trees and identify trees, do these, we used to call them Latin walks. And what we aim to do, in much the same spirit that you might become a bird watcher, really as a very amateur kind of hobby, was to try and identify all the 100 or so species of native trees that we had in the jungle around us. And we didn't get there. We probably got to about 40 or 50 trees. But that was, I think, the first time, and quite late in my life, when I started to, get familiar with trees and learn how to touch them and feel them and spot their characters and to distinguish them. So this was when I was already in my sort of 50s, late 50s, in fact. And when I came back to Delhi, after having failed to do certain other things that I tried to do and didn't do very well, is when I said, maybe I need to apply some of what I've learned, as a tree spotter, and do something very simple. Maybe just make a book that is 20 pages long about the common trees of Delhi, and that's how it started, really. And then it just went on and on and on, and got deeper and deeper as time went by. And that's really how I stumbled into into trees, and that was the trees of Delhi. Yes, that's right.
So both of you have had fairly large audiences before you came to writing, if I'm right. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I wouldn't call my audiences large before I came to writing.
No,
I was the mad fringe of new cinema in India. Really, not large audiences at all.
But what about your what you did for Channel 4?
Not a large audience either, Suprabha. Not at all.
Okay. So, but you've had to think about people and what you would like to communicate with them through your work. And I was just wondering, when you've been in the film medium or documentary work, how does it translate when you start working with a book? What led you up to the book, actually planning this particular book?
So for me, when I was writing The Trees of Delhi, I think I had the advantage of having so recently myself been an amateur, not knowing very much about the trees, that it was easy to write for other people who were in that position. I was addressing people having very recently been in their position. So it made it very easy to write in a simple manner, not try and show off, not try and be technical. And I think a lot of the feedback that I got from people after the book was out was all about, thank you for making it so simple, to be able to wander around the city and indeed in other cities in India and recognize what we're seeing. But I did try to make it very simple. That was very much the objective.
How about you, John?
Well, I think that the sort of training we have, whether it's in film or in my background, sort of television and some radio, and then online, is to think about audiences and to think about who they are. And I suppose the advantage that you've got with two people here who are not specialists by training is that it's easier for us to empathize, I think, as Pradip says, with the audience, and to kind of put oneself in their shoes and to try and tell stories that you think will be captivating, or put across information in a way that'll be captivating. I mean, for me, the sort of coming from television, which is an absolutely sort of collaborative event, it's large teams of people all needing to be marshaled and be pointed in the same direction. Writing was a very sort of strange thing to be doing, because you lock yourself in a room, or you do some research and you have great ideas or whatever, but it's a rather solitary occupation. And it wasn't until I had to work, or had the joy of working with an illustrator, that I thought, now my television training is coming in useful, because actually I have to go backwards and forwards with someone else and really be thinking about their creativity and their input as well. So that was actually sort of quite a joy. The other thing I'd add is that another thing that Pradip and I have in common is that we both, I believe, are married to well-known authors who do this for their complete living. In your case, Pradip, I think Arundhati Roy, who is internationally known author, and in my case, Tracy Chevalier, who wrote Girl with a Pearl Earring and is probably also internationally known. And when I started on my books, I really saw it as a hobby. Of course, married to someone who does it professionally, she didn't have the other distractions of the other kind of things that she was doing in her life, and could concentrate on it totally, and also had the sort of strength of character, I would say, that I don't have, to actually concentrate and when one's on one's own, and actually focus to the exclusion of other things. So I learned a lot from observing her.
I'd love you to talk a little bit, Jonathan, about your collaboration with the wonderful artist who illustrates your books, because it's completely captivating, outstanding stuff. But yeah.
Sorry, thank you. I wonder if we could just put up a couple of images while I talk. Would it be okay to put up the phytoplankton image? I don't know whether that's easy to do, but it was rather wonderful working with a. There we go. So this is not everyone thinks of phytoplankton as plants, but actually these tiny single-celled organisms in the sea are a very, very important part of the carbon cycle of the world, and they have these sort of amazing shapes. And then if you put up marigold, which is actually one of the entries from India, you should be able to find marigold there in your file. There you can see the sort of creativity that has gone into these. And perhaps if I just show one more, maybe the prickly pear, if you put that one up. The process for working with Lucille, thank you. Isn't that amazing? She's done a wonderful job there. So if you can drop that now and come back to me. The process was that I decided what I wanted to write and what stories I would include, and what the key aspects of each story were. I then put together a mood board of photographs of the key elements that I thought would be important. And Lucille would then work from those photographs from that mood board, and then give a sort of a rough outline of what she was intending. She's done a lot of botanical drawing in the past for Royal Botanic Gardens Kew and elsewhere, but she's not a botanist. And that meant that occasionally she would, if she didn't like some of the pictures I'd seen and she couldn't immediately get me on the phone, then she would scurry off to the internet and find what she thought was an areca palm or something, and it would turn out to be a balsa wood tree or an oak tree. And I'd say, but what have you done? And she'd say, but it looks so beautiful. So there's a little bit of backwards and forwards between us in a very good-natured way. And I always love having someone to work with who has a different sort of point of view. But Pradip, did you take the photographs for your book, because they're beautifully illustrated, your books?
Yeah, I did take the photographs, John. It was a huge task. I mean, there's something like 3,000 photographs in my jungle trees, and I had this. I had to make this matrix, this kind of where I knew that for every tree in the book, I needed to get a picture of the leaf, a cutout of the leaf, perhaps a red leaf, a picture of the fruit, a cutout of the fruit, the whole picture, the whole tree, some of the bark. So there was 10 or 12 elements for every tree that I needed to do. And you had to keep track of what you'd done and what still needed doing. So I had this very colorful chart. And every time I did a trip, I'd fill in little boxes, little pigeonholes where I'd would have done some of these things. It makes a very pretty chart, but it was a big job. But I can't think how else I would have done it if I was using photographs, because how do you get that kind of commitment of time and energy from another photographer, And I've often envied the freedom that you get if you are an artist and you're not having to work with with a given photograph. So I love the look of your books, but I'm also very admiring, Jonathan, of the way you tell stories, the way you present scientific ideas. It's very friendly, it's very engaging. And I have a question for you, if I can, Supi, if I can just ask Jonathan, I'd love to know whether you did in fact travel, like in a linear fashion, like Jules Verne. Were these all sporadic trips that you made, and then you just added them all up, or how did you go about actually collecting your trees?
Well, thanks for asking. The nothing in my life has ever been linear. It's all been terribly opportunistic. So the book is arranged in a sort of roughly sort of traveling from west to east around the world and back to Europe again. But certainly my travels were not that. They were sporadic travels over many years, some of them with botanical expeditions with Kew or with Cambridge University Botanic Garden. Some of them were, results of effectively tourist trips, or as a documentary filmmaker, I had the opportunity to visit a lot of countries, often working on completely different subjects. But I would then scurry off when I had some time and sort of fall in love with the plants. And there are some plants that I didn't get to see, and that I could only see in botanic gardens. And in fact, there's one plant in around the world, in 80 plants, that actually I couldn't see, and none of us can see because it's extinct. One of the plants that went extinct in about the 200 AD or so. Most of them I've seen, and it's very nice of you to say what you said about the writing. Obviously I've written sort of television scripts before, but writing for the written page, for the page is different, and it's something that it doesn't come quickly, I have to say. It's quite a time-consuming process, but an enjoyable one. I'm glad you like it.
John, I just want to stop you there and ask you, for instance, when I was looking at what you'd selected from India, I had a question like, why did you not choose jackfruit, or why did you choose mango? And jackfruit's my favorite tree. But it just made me wonder about the process of how you actually selected the particular plants you did. And you've actually gone from algae to bamboo to ferns, cycads. No, I don't know if you did cycads, but you've actually gone through the whole evolutionary range.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually one of my criteria. So well spotted, but obviously you're a botanist. But I wanted to make sure that there was obviously representation from around the world. There needed to be different kinds of plants from different plant families. So there are, in the new book, about 25% of the plants are trees, actually. From as you say, ranging from seaweeds to phytoplankton to ferns and so on, as well as flowering plants. And the most important thing for me was that whether people were coming from a point of view of scientific knowledge or historical knowledge or folklore or culture, that whatever their expertise, there would be something in here that would be a surprise in each story. So that meant that some species, everyone in England asked me, why didn't you do the oak tree? Everyone's kind of fixated on the tree. And basically it was because I couldn't find anything really, really new and special to say. And and if you can't, then you have to leave it out. And whereas with I don't know, the mango, there's a fantastic story there about this. I think it's fantastic about this paint that was used in Europe and all over the world, actually, in the sort of Middle Ages. That was a luminous kind of yellow paint. And there's been a debate over the years about whether this Indian yellow, as it was called, was actually the product of cows eating mango leaves, or whether this was just a sort of a made-up old wives' tale, if you like. And
cows dying as a result of eating the mango leaves.
Yes, and it's only in 2000. And it's only in 2019 that the actual forensic work was done, and it turns out that yes, it was from cows. In the banana story, which is another one from India, I think that, and I'll mangle the name here, but for a world audience, Panchamrutam, if I've got that anywhere near the right pronunciation of this sort of banana dessert with dates and honey and jaggery and spices and so on, is probably a bit of a surprise. Whereas banana flambé is something that everyone kind of knows of here. And so along with the science, and there's quite a bit of science in here actually. Did you know that bananas light up in nightclubs under ultraviolet light? They glow. Next time you're in a nightclub, you need to take a ripe banana, and why that might be, and so on. There's the science alongside the other things, but I try to weave these together.
Pradip, thanks for that, John. Pradip, I actually don't know if you've covered what percentage of the trees of central India did you actually cover, but one thing I do know is that everywhere I go, people are using your book. It's in South India, it's in Central India, and that's a remarkable achievement. Since you've selected, how many altogether have you covered, and how did you do that?
It's 168 trees for Central India, and I tried to define my area ecologically rather than with political boundaries. And I mean, I knew that some of the trees exist in a much wider provenance. They go all the way down the Eastern Ghats, for example, and beyond the Satpura. But the Satpuras were the southern slopes of the Satpura hills were my southern boundary. But because you have to limit it somewhere. So 168 trees was all the trees that I found. I didn't leave out anything that I came across. Yeah.
It is a fantastic. Sorry, there's a delay on the line, so excuse me for interrupting. And I just wanted to say it's a fantastic it's a field guide for people who are in that region, but it's also a field guide for those of us who vicariously visit. And it's very important to have field guides like this that are accessible to non-botanists and enjoyable to non-botanists. And the reason for that is that once people start to name things, I think they begin to value them more. And really, what I see the heart of this is a really sort of wonderful celebration that will make people want to protect. That's the sort of joy of your book, I think.
It's interesting you say that about naming things, because what I've been doing for the last year or so is trying to float a particular name into the vocabulary that people use for desert landscapes. For exactly that reason, Jonathan, that if you have a name for it, you can perhaps learn to love it and visit it and photograph it and conserve it ultimately. But we have a very endangered shrubland in the desert that is every bit as interesting as the mulga regions in Western Australia, or the chaparral, or the garrigue, or the fynbos, but it's regarded as a complete wasteland by foresters and most people. And one of the things I've set out to do is to try and introduce the word roi, which is the local word for this shrubland, into the language that people use when they describe the Thar Desert.
So, we're pretty close to the end. It's like just a few minutes and we've just scratched the surface. But I just want to say that the first line in Pradip's book is possibly, just I like trees, especially wild ones. I feel deep empathy in their company. That's like 3 lines. And to me, that's the favorite beginning of all books for me. And I wondered if, both of you, with your profound relationship with specific trees, with landscapes, with education, and in this state of where we are with the planet and the great disconnect from the beings whom we live with, is there something that we can talk about in that? What would you like to see happen as a result of your books, and just with people and plants?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
Just very briefly to condense a very large subject. Most of the work I do now relates to trying to alert people to landscapes and habitats and ecologies that are endangered because we don't respect them. We have a very funny, in India, Jonathan, you probably know this, but we have something like 2,600 native species of trees alone, not counting all the other plants. 2,600. That's a massive number. I think the whole of the UK is something like 31, and if you just take England, it's something like 11 species. So but of these 2,600, we only actually use and grow and celebrate about 100, which is about 3% of our natural native species of trees. I just find that a shocking fact because it says something about our cultural relationship with trees and our openness to actually say, well, maybe there are all these wonderful trees out there that we can actually cultivate. So all my work now, from now on, but also from a little while ago, is all about now celebrating trees and celebrating plants, and celebrating the idea that we really need to restore our ecologies because we've done an enormous amount of damage to them. We're still doing it, and we have a government that is now actually lowering the bar, making it easier to divert forests, to actually divert, wonderful natural habitats for so-called development, for urbanization, for oil and gas, all of that. Over to you, Jonathan.
So, John, you've talked about 3 plants taking over what most of humanity is using, right? So tell us something about that, the shocking state of that.
It's also shocking that we depend on just 3 species for 50% of all our calories on Earth that we consume, which are wheat, rice, and maize. And either we eat those or we eat animals that eat those. And if it's and 12 species that would include soy and potatoes and so on for 85% of our calories, and that leaves us very vulnerable. It leads to huge monocultures. But you asked what would I like the effect of the book to be? Well, the effect that I would really like is something that parallels the last. I'm just going to read you the last sentence, one sentence only, of the entry on the lotus plant, where I've gone into the science and all sorts of other things. But the science is linked to the culture, and that is the lotus, perfect and unsullied by the muddy waters in which it grows, with glittering beads of water that dance and sparkle, jewel-like in the center of its leaves, symbolizes the spiritual journey towards light and wisdom. And for me, I'd like my books, if they could, to be part of people's journey towards some sort of wisdom, where they look on a longer term basis rather than just extracting value for the short term to our environment.
That's beautifully said, Jonathan. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I think, Pradip, you also mentioned hope with the shrines disappearing in your book, right?
It's true. You know, we've had, when you start going around all our wild areas, all our protected areas, you know, we protect something like a little less than 5% of the surface area of this country. That's actually, you know, way too small. And that 5% includes some of the lesser protected areas, such as, you know, wildlife sanctuaries, and, you know, it's not just national parks and tiger reserves. But when you go around to these areas, and especially if you've been looking at forestry books,
Pradip, we're going to have to begin the Q&A.
Oh, okay. All right.
Want to just finish that point?
Yeah, just that, you know, you see a lot of destruction. You read about a forest from, you know, 50 years ago, it's not there anymore, or it's become a monocultural plantation. So there's a lot of sadness in traveling around and comparing how things have gone.
Yeah. So here's a question for Jonathan from Anne Luzado via Facebook, which is, how many plant varieties do you believe we have lost due to the industrialization of agriculture?
I can't give you a precise answer. If I was a politician, I would obviously make something up, and I would probably answer a completely different question. What I can say is that there are about 350 or possibly 400,000 different species of plants on the planet. And about 40% of them are at risk of extinction. So 2 out of every 5 are at risk of extinction.
Out of risk of extinction in the next, how long?
Difficult to say, but, you know, over the coming decades, if we carry on as we are. Some of them are at risk of extinction in the next year. Some of them are in the risk of extinction in 2 or 3 decades.
Yeah. Pradip, here's a question from Nupur via Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the love of plants and nature is adequately inculcated in children? Botany and biology lessons tend to be dreary and restricted to the classroom. So that's a question.
Yeah, no, I don't think botany and biology are well taught at all. And it's true that, you know, if the minute it becomes curriculum, you're in danger of turning some little child's mind off and depriving him or her of all the excitement. Somebody once reviewed my book and said, you know, and can you believe he's not even trained as a botanist? Can you imagine how much better his book would have been if he was a botanist? And I think he was completely wrong, because it's the botanists, really, I think, who actually write really boring books. And it's people like Jonathan and other people who are not trained as botanists who you can expect the magic from. And we've seen that again and again.
We have the wonderful thing in our garden that we have all the first-year botany students of Northern Kerala have to come to our garden once in their, you know, their course. And that for them, it's these dry books have come to life, and that's a very special thing. Pradip, actually for both of you, from Peter Griffin via YouTube, could either of you talk about the underground network of roots and fungi and such like, and the way that trees and plants communicate, what people call the wood wide web?
I'd be happy to take that if you want me to. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so trees, you know, need carbon dioxide from the air and water through the roots. They also need a few other nutrients. They don't add much to the weight of a tree, but they're important. And those nutrients come through the roots from the soil. But in order to make that process more efficient, they have symbiotic relationships with fungi that spread out tiny, tiny little threads throughout the soil. And those fungi can extract chemicals from the soil better than the roots can. And in return, the trees give some sugar, the products of photosynthesis, to the fungi. Now, when a tree is under attack, it can send chemicals through the air, but also chemicals through this underground network of fungal mycelium, as it's called, fungal threads. Those molecules can trigger other trees nearby, say within 20 or 30 meters, to start manufacturing those defense chemicals as well. So the communication is not intentional, so that trees are not intelligent in the way that animals are, but the chemicals are manufactured and trigger other trees to defend themselves. So there's a sort of it's a kind of automatic process, if you like, and people call that the wood wide web.
So do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just that, you know, I had the privilege of doing an introduction to Peter Wohleben's, both his books about trees, you know, The Heartbeat of Trees and The Hidden Life of Trees, and where he undertook to explain mycorrhizal fungi and the way trees communicate to a lay audience. He did a terrific job. But I just want to add that, you know, perhaps it's true that trees are not intelligent in the way that we define intelligence. But one of the things that Wohleben is setting out to do is saying that, you know, there are all kinds of ways in which trees have remarkable senses and abilities that we have never suspected before, such as, for example, the ability of a tree to see, or a plant, for the ability of a plant to see. Now, obviously, plants don't see in the way that we see with ocular instruments, but he cites the example of a climber that mimics the shape of the leaves of the plant that it climbs on. And as an experiment, they actually created a plastic tree and put that climber on top of the plastic tree. So the plastic tree had leaves that didn't exist in any form that is in nature. And even those leaves were mimicked by this plant. So there is obviously some means by which plants have an ability to sense a shape, you know, and three-dimensionality, but in a way that we don't understand yet. And we didn't understand mycorrhiza before the 1990s. We had no idea. And now we see it as a whole underground microbial, you know, feast that is going on all the time, with basically mycorrhiza being able to lap chemicals from rocks that are otherwise not available to plants. It's just an amazing thing.
Yeah, you know, I just think that we've been so limited by this sense of intelligence coming through a central nervous system, and when biochemistry and this language of molecules and thousands of different molecules speaking to each other is really, you know, it shifts your sense of what plants do and what they sense and how they work. And I think both of you have brought that very much, you know, to the forefront of consciousness of people reading, that plants do things. They are active shapers of environment. I love that. Here's a question for Pradip from Yash via Instagram. He says, we see huge depredation of nature everywhere in all continents. How much longer do you think the Earth as we know it will survive at this rate?
33.5 years. No, I'm kidding. Look, I don't think anybody knows how long the Earth's going to survive. The fact that we are in grave crisis is evident to everybody. The last people who seem to be able to be convinced of this are governments. I'm actually quite ashamed of some of the things that have been said in the name of India at the Glasgow COPs meeting. I don't think it was very wise. So, you know, the crisis is upon us. How long the world will last, God knows. You know, people keep saying that the world will be much better off when human beings disappear off the earth, and that may well be true. But the crisis is, you know, I think humans have despoiled the world to a point where the destruction will go on even after we disappear, if we disappear, when we disappear. But
can I just say that I'm not very proud of my government either, not at all. And one of the things that I think is, in my mind, you know, strong political leadership is often, in my mind, about doing the right thing, even when the population is not completely convinced yet, and leading them in a direction that is right. It takes a lot of guts to do that. And I believe that your government and mine at the moment have a sort of populist intent. They want to sort of it's these sort of slightly macho leaders. I think I should speak for England, not for India. Slightly macho leadership here that is very, very kind of popular with a particular element, but actually is not necessarily taking the country in the right direction. And there are very few leaders at the moment who are really sort of doing the right thing with a capital R and a capital T. And that takes much more guts, and it's much more difficult. So you have to have real charisma and real leadership quality to take people in the direction they didn't realize they wanted to go.
So I just want to add to that, question of crisis, that people think the crisis is ahead. It's actually, when 90% of the Western Ghat biome is gone, or when large mammals or large fish in the oceans, 80, 90% of them have gone. It's actually, we are at the end of the crisis. It's a huge ecocide, and genocide has actually already happened, and some people are waking up to it now. I think that's very important to keep in mind. For Jonathan from Ashir via Facebook, what is it that closes humankind's eyes to the damage caused to nature? We have two questions and just like a couple of minutes. So
okay, so the first thing is plant blindness. Many people have evolved to see things that move, and they're sort of more sensitive to animals than they are to plants. But all life depends on plants, right? So that's one reason. Second reason is the profit motive, short-termism. That people. It's much easier to sort of worry about tomorrow rather than worry about it today. So short-term exploitation is the other issue. Greed.
Yeah. Here's another question for Jonathan from Joyce via the Lit Live website. To be in clover signifies the good life. What has caused the clover to acquire this image?
Well, that's because clover is a legume, and it's a plant that can put nitrogen back into the soil without needing great big power stations running the Haber process to fix nitrogen like we do in sort of the so-called modern agriculture. Clover and other legumes, they put nitrogen back into the soil because they have a relationship with bacteria in the nodules in their roots. And in Europe in the 18th century, vast fields of clover enabled the ground to be much more fertile and therefore support many, many more people. And that was associated not only with the good life because there were more people that could be fed, but also there were more bees, more honeybees. So literally life was a bit sweeter.
Yeah. Do we have time for a last question? Okay. So there's a question to all three of us from Fazal Rashid via Facebook. What do the three of you think about the future of field guides in a time when AI increasingly makes it easy for folks to ID plants using a digital device?
I'm out of a job.
It's not just about identification, though, is it? It's the thing is
exactly.
Pradip, your guides bring a richness to the experience and a joy to the experience, which is much more than just someone saying, that's a mango tree or that's a sandalwood tree. I mean, this is, it's not just about identification. It's about kind of a real feel for the organism. So I think there's a good future for field guides, but some of them might appear on different devices other than paper.
No, you're absolutely right, Jonathan. I think that IDing a plant is just the very first step, and then getting to know it, and getting to enjoy it, and getting to see its relationship with other things is all that's all part of the story.
And then telling stories about them.
Absolutely.
Yes, so we're being asked to wrap up. Now, I really enjoyed listening to the two of you, and I absolutely love your books. I think, my concern is that this disconnect is so serious that it takes people like yourselves to somehow turn us back into the real world. And I'm afraid that AI is not going to do that. It's going to take us further away from the real world. And Really, thank you both so much. I've traveled with Pradip, so I know how he observes and loves trees and loves the land and loves the people who live there. And I can see from your book, John, that it's absolutely true that you really love the cultures, bearing these plants or the plants bearing cultures. And
I
somehow
want
we
to
need
visit.
to get back into the real world. And
I want
thank
to
you
come and
both for
visit your
that.
garden, Suprabha. I want to come and visit your garden.
Oh, please, yes. Here's a hello and here's a hello. You can come.
Yeah, we must go traveling together, Jonathan, whenever you come to this
Please,
part of the world.
please,
Thank you all.
please.
Thank you. Thank you very
you.
much. Thank you. Thank you, Supi.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to our panel for this wonderfully insightful and engaging conversation. The books discussed are available at our knowledge partner landmarkxcite.com. Thanks to our lovely audience for being here today and sending in all your questions, and to our partners for making this possible. This session was sponsored by Godrej. Tata Literature Live, co-sponsored by Tata Steel and Tata Projects, and powered by Godrej, continues with many more sessions. Coming up at 8:45 p.m. IST is Activity Report, where Daniel Lieberman and Antoine Lewis will be debunking myths and misconceptions about exercise. I am certainly attending this session. See you there.